So factoring and solving equations. Now, this would have been a perfectly good question on the quiz you just had. Factor this, okay? So how do I factor that? I need two numbers that do what? Yeah, multiply to 2 and add to 3. I like the way you do the add first and the multiply second. It's just like no big deal. So multiply to 2, add to 3. What numbers do that? 1 and 2. Pretty easy. My answer is what? X plus 1, X plus 2. That's what the answer looks like when the problem says factor, okay? Now, what's the difference between this problem and this problem? Yeah, there's an equal sign. The equal sign means it's a what? What's the noun? It is an equation, okay? What does the solution to an equation look like? X equals some number, okay? So the solution to this is X equal some number or numbers, okay? That's what the solution to an equation would look like. So please don't ever, if there's not an equal sign, don't put an equal sign in your answer. You can never get an equal sign into a problem that didn't have one to begin with, okay? If the problem starts with an equal sign, your answer must end with an equal sign. So that's a good way to keep that straight. So if we look at this, an expression with an equal sign, we talked about that just a moment ago, that is an equation. So what we want to do is, how do I solve something like this? Okay, so if you look at this one that we just did, if I factor this, that is x plus 2, x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, in math, we love to have equations equal to 0 because we have good strategies for solving those. So let's go down and talk about that. So think of this. I've got two numbers that multiply to give me what? 0. Okay. What do I know about one of those numbers? Not negative. If I've got two numbers and I multiply them and get a 0, what do I know about one of those numbers? One of those numbers has to be 0. There's no other way. 2 and 4 will never multiply to give you 0, but 2 and what? 0 will do it. So that's why we love to have equations set equal to 0. Now the same thing is not true. If I had x minus 3 times x plus 4 equal 1, if two numbers multiply to be 1, it could be 5 and 1/5, it could be 10 and 1/10, it could be 12 and 1/12. It goes on and on forever. I don't have good strategies for solving this equation. All of our strategies involve solving an equation that's equal to 0. So we want to be navigating when we see equations, can I get it equal to 0? And then go from there. So let's look at this. If these two things multiply to give me 0, that means that x minus 3 equals 0, or x plus 4 equals 0, right? If these two things multiply to give me 0, this means that x is equal to what? 3. And this means that x is equal to -4. That's how I get to a solution. So if I can get it to factored form, then it's very easy to get to the solution. So that's why we spend a lot of time factoring. So let's take a look at this next one. Now, here is something that says solve. It doesn't say factor. It's implicit that you've got to know factoring is the method you use to get to the solution. Now, I said that we want equations set equal to what? 0. How can I rewrite this so it's equal to 0? 6x squared minus 6x, what? Minus 36 equals 0. So that's the first thing. Get it equal to 0. Then let's strategize about what we need to do. Now, we need to factor this completely. When you're factoring, what's the first thing I said? If it works, always do. What's the first factoring method that I said always do? What is? Yeah, the common factor. If you can find a common factor, do it first, because if I had to multiply 6 and 36, I think that's what is that number? Like, is it 216 or something? That's a big number, okay? If I can factor, I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. What can I factor out of this? 6. So that leaves me x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. Now, which is an easier thing to factor, this one or the one in parentheses? The one in parentheses. Now, what is our method for factoring that? I need two numbers that do what? Yeah, multiply to negative 6 and add to negative 1. What numbers will do that? Yeah, so where I'm hearing, so here, the only choices are 1 and 6, 2 and 3. What's the only way I can combine them and get a negative 1? Yeah, negative 3, positive 2. Okay. If it helps, like if you think like, oh, it's this one, like I heard 1 and 6, if you had written down both of them, maybe that helps to eliminate the one that's not it. Okay, so 2 and negative 3. So what do I do with this information? I go straight to my factorization, right? So this is 6 x what? Plus 2 x minus 3 equals 0. Now, it's completely factored. I've got three things multiplied together to give me 0. When will 6 be equal to 0? Easy question. When is 6 equal to 0? Never, okay? That's not going to work. When is x plus 2 equal to 0? If x plus 2 is equal to 0, that happens when x is what? Yeah, x equal negative 2. And then when is x minus 3 equal to 0? That happens when x is equal to 3. So my solution is x equal 3 and x equal negative 2. Okay? So again, the factoring we've been doing for about a week. Okay? What's new here is it's an equation. So there's one extra step you have to go to, that is finding the solution. You know, doing factoring is the method that gets you to the solution. But before we start it out, we want everything to be equal to 0 before we do anything. Okay? So now what you're going to see over and over again are the methods we've been using for factoring are going to start cropping up in equations. Okay? Now, let's look at this guy. What's the first step I want? I want it equal to 0. So I can write 2x cubed minus 2x. And what happens when I bring the x squared to the other side? It becomes what? Negative x squared. And then the negative 1, when I bring it over, becomes a plus 1 equal 0. Okay, now how many things do you see there? 4 things. What was the only factoring method? Grouping is the only thing we're going to have to work. Okay, so if this factors, it's going to be factor by grouping. So what do those two things have in common? Yeah, so 2x, and that leaves me a what? X squared minus 1. Okay, whatever this sign is, copy it down. Okay, and then what am I left with here? This is, and if it helps you to think of this as a negative 1 in front of that parentheses, what do I multiply negative 1 by to get a negative x squared? X squared. What do I multiply negative 1 by to get a positive 1? Negative 1. And if you're living right, you look in the parentheses and you see the same thing. Okay? So now what's the next step? It's what? 2x, what? Minus 1 times x squared minus 1 equals 0. That was factor by grouping. Is there any other factor method that I need to apply now? What is that? Difference of two squares. So this is 2x minus 1, x minus 1, x plus 1 equals 0. Now I am completely factored. Factored, so it's like this times this times this. These are each factors. You know, like the factors of 6 are 2 and 3. So 2 times 3, that's a factorization of 6. So now I've got each factor, so I set each one equal to 0. If 2x minus 1 is equal to 0, that means that 2x has to equal 1. So x has to equal what? 1/2. Okay. If x minus 1 equals 0, that means x equal 1. If x plus 1 equals 0, that means x equal -1. Okay, so those are the 3 solutions to this equation. Question? Okay, so again, incrementally, we're not doing a lot over what we've been doing. Factoring was the big thing, the tool you needed to have under your belt in order to get to this today. If I just started this today, might be overwhelming, but the factoring you've studied for, you just took a quiz over it. When you see an equal sign, it means that factoring is the method to get to a solution. Your answer has to have an equal sign in it, like you see here. So what's going to happen here is you're going to see things, and I'm not going to say, like I spoon-fed you a little bit on this quiz, say use difference of squares. You're not going to see that. You're going to see the word solve, and then you're going to see an equation. Okay. I look at this equation. What do I want? What's the first thing I want it to look like? I want it equal to 0. So 64 x squared minus 49 equals 0. Then I want to ask myself, what methods do I have to factor that? And what is it? Difference of 2 squares. So what's the square root of 64x squared? 8x minus 7 times 8x plus 7. That would have been the answer on this quiz, but I've got an equal 0 here. So that means I have to set each factor equal to 0. So if 8x minus 7 equals 0, that means that 8x equals 7. So x is equal to what? 7/8. You'll get to where you can now, what do you think this one is? -7/8. So when you set this one equal to 0, you'll get to where you do this enough to where you'll just go straight to the answer. But I'm writing out each step here. So x equals -7/8. And don't be embarrassed if you need to write out all of these steps. But we'll do this enough that you can look at this and say, oh, x equals 7/8. That's equal -7/8. You may get to there. Okay. Let's look at the next one. So I rewrite this as 8x squared minus 10x, and then what? Plus 3 equal 0. Okay. This is a trinomial. Okay. If this can factor, I will be looking for 2 numbers that do what? Yeah, 2 numbers that multiply 24 and add to -10. Okay. 24 is a common thing that we factor, but if it doesn't pop in your head, just write down. It's either 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and what? 8, 4 and 6. Those are the only possibilities. How can I combine those numbers and get a -10? Yeah, -6 and -4. When you multiply those numbers, you get a positive 24. When you add those numbers, you get a -10. Now, what do I do with these 2 numbers? 2 and 12. To get a -10, I could make this 12 negative and the 2 positive. But when I multiply them, what would I get? I get a -24. So that's the problem with that one. Okay, so good question on that one. So just double check these 2 numbers multiply to positive 24, add to -10. Now here, what do I do with these 2 numbers? Do I go straight to the factorization? No, I have to do what? Rewrite it to factor by grouping. So that means 8x squared, and then I use these 2 numbers, minus 4x minus 6x plus 3 equals 0. I saw some people, when they're doing grouping, they would do things like they would use parentheses. I'll encourage you not to do that. If you're doing grouping and you need a visual, try something like this. Okay, try underlining, so that you can do it. So what do these first 2 have in common? 4x. So that leaves me what? 2x minus 1. whatever this sign is, copy it down. It's a minus sign. And then what do the next two things have in common? 3. So what do I multiply negative 3 by to get a negative 6? That's 2. Then I've got an x. What do you multiply negative 3 to get a positive 3? Negative 1. So this is what? 4x minus 3 times 2x minus 1 equals 0. That's the hard work. We factored it. To get to the solution, you set each of these equal to 0. If 4x minus 3 equals 0, that means that 4x equal 3, or x equal 3/4. And then 2x minus 1 equals 0 means that 2x equal 1, or x equal 1/2. So that's your solution, x equal 1/2, or x equal 3/4. Yeah, just write it, just have them separate, circle them, Sometimes people will write it like this, x equal 3/4, 1/2. You don't have to do that. If I can just look and see, oh, you got the two right numbers, that's all I care about. So this shouldn't feel that much harder than what we've been doing, right? We've been building up skills to factor. The factor is the hardest stuff here, okay? Sure. The one, this one? Well, here's the thing. I get that. I'm not asking you to do a lot with the fraction. I mean, I get it. Adding fractions, nobody wants to do that. Multiplying fractions. All you had to do here was you're solving for x. So I need x to be by itself. What is keeping it from being by itself? The 8. So if it's being multiplied by 8 and I don't want it to be multiplied by 8, I can divide everything by 8. So it's just, if you can just isolate, then that's your answer. So we don't have to do anything beyond that. So, but I prefer to have 7/8 instead of whatever that is, 0.875. I don't want a decimal there. So you can get to this, okay? Let's take a pause then. So it's already equal to 0. That's good. What factoring method? Difference of two squares. So it's what? X squared minus 9 times x squared plus 9 equals 0. Now, can this one be factored? Yeah, that's x minus 3, x plus 3 times x squared plus 9 equals 0. Okay. I set each one equal to 0. What happens when I set that one equal to 0? X is what? 3. This gives me x equal 3. This gives me what? X equal negative 3. This one's a little bit of a problem. X squared plus 9 equals 0. That means that x squared is equal to what? Negative 9. Can you square a number and get negative 9? No, because when you square a number, you get what kind of number? Positive number. So these are my only solutions. This one did not yield any solution for me. You see how that happened? Okay. So when you set that equal to 0, x is 3. Set this one equal to 0, x is negative 3. Set this one equal to 0, and I didn't get a solution. Okay. So my only solutions are 3 and negative 3 for this one. Right. If it's something squared plus a positive number. Okay. About what I just did, I've got them all equal to 0, but that's not too hard of a step. Okay. So what factoring method here? This is not grouping, it's not difference of squares, it's a trinomial. I need two numbers to do what? Multiply to negative 18 and add to negative 7. What numbers do that? Yeah, so the only possibilities with 18 are 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. How can I combine those to get a negative 7? Yeah, so negative 9 and positive 2. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this as 6x squared plus 2x minus 9x minus 3 equals 0. What method now? Grouping. Okay, so I can factor out a 2x, and I'm left with what? 3x plus 1. Whatever that sign is, copy it down. It's a minus sign. Okay, now what do the 9 and the 3 have in common? A 3. So what do you multiply negative 3 by to get a negative 9? Positive 3. You got this x. What do you multiply negative 3 by to get a negative 3? 1. All of that equals 0. So what is the final factorization here? 2x minus 3, 3x plus 1 equals 0. That is completely factored, and now I do what? Set each one equal to 0. So if 2x minus 3 equals 0, that means that 2x equal 3, or x equal what? 3 halves. This means that 3x plus 1 equals 0. That means that 3x equal negative 1, or x equal what? Negative 1/3. They're fractions, but that's the end. You like fractions to be the end of your problem, not the middle of your problem. Okay. And then in this one, I need two numbers that do what? Yeah. Multiply to negative 28 and add to 3. What are those numbers? 7 and negative 4. And then what do I do with those numbers? I go straight to my answer. I don't have to do the grouping stuff. Because of that being an x squared and not a 6x squared, I go to what? X plus 7, x minus 4 equals 0. That means that x is equal to what? Negative 7 or positive 4. You can also write your answer like that. X is negative 7 or positive 4. Okay?